The biting chill of winter had claimed the city of Portland, Oregon, a heavy blanket of snow piling on rooftops and streets, muffling all sound. The usual bustle of the Pearl District had given way to an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crunch of tires on icy roads. In a dimly lit alley behind a row of trendy boutiques and artisanal coffee shops, Max, the once proud golden retriever, lay motionless, his golden coat tangled and dulled by grime. Thin lines of breath escaped his cold, cracked nose, forming small clouds in the frigid air. His frail body shivered against the unforgiving wind that whipped through the narrow passageway, carrying with it the scent of nearby dumpsters and the faint aroma of brewing coffee. Max's large, soulful eyes scanned his surroundings, though his gaze was hollow, surrendered to despair. The warm glow from nearby windows only served to emphasize the stark contrast between the cozy lives within and his own dire circumstances. Max had not always known this life of suffering. Just weeks ago, he had bounded through the lush green fields of Forest Park, his silky fur shining in the autumn sunlight, a cheerful bark echoing through the trees. He remembered the laughter of children, the gentle hands of his owners, the Thompsons, as they threw tennis balls for him to fetch. The memory of his comfortable bed by the fireplace in their cozy craftsman home now seemed like a distant dream, fading with each passing moment in this harsh reality. But those memories were stolen by the relentless hunger, frostbite, and betrayal that now defined his days. It had happened so suddenly, on a frigid morning 2 weeks prior. The family car had pulled up to this very alley, the engine idling as Max wagged his tail, thinking they were going for another adventure. Instead, the hands that had once scratched behind his ears had shoved him into the snowdrift. The car door slammed, the engine roared, and just like that, the only family he had ever known was gone. In those first few hours, Max had waited patiently, certain it was all a mistake. Surely they would return, call his name, scoop him up in their arms and take him home. But as the sun set and rose again, that hope began to fade. Since then, he had wandered the streets of Portland, each day a cruel fight for survival in a world that seemed to have forgotten him. At first, Max had tried to find his way home. He padded through unfamiliar neighborhoods, his nose to the ground, searching for any scent that might lead him back to the Thompsons. But the city was vast, and his strength was failing. He had never been this far from home before, and the towering buildings and constant noise of traffic only served to disorient him further. As days passed, Max's once lustrous coat became matted and dirty. His ribs began to show through his skin as hunger took its toll. He learned to scavenge, nosing through garbage cans behind restaurants and cafes. Sometimes, a kindly chef or waiter would toss him a scrap, but more often than not, he was shooed away with angry words and threatening gestures. The streets of Portland, usually so vibrant and full of life, became a gauntlet of dangers for the abandoned dog. He narrowly avoided being hit by cars as he crossed busy intersections, confused by the changing traffic lights. Other dogs, many just as desperate as he was, sometimes challenged him for territory or scraps of food. Max, never one for confrontation, would slink away, tail between his legs, seeking quieter corners of the city. Nights were the worst. As temperatures plummeted, Max sought whatever shelter he could find. Sometimes it was a cardboard box in an alley, other times the narrow space beneath a parked car. He curled up tight, trying to conserve what little body heat he had left, but it was never enough. The cold seeped into his bones, making his joints ache and his muscles tremble. There were moments of kindness amidst the hardship. A homeless man sharing a piece of his sandwich, a child sneaking him a bit of hot dog when her parents weren't looking, a college student pausing to give him a gentle pat. But these brief moments of warmth couldn't undo the damage that days of neglect and exposure had wrought on Max's body and spirit. As the second week of his abandonment drew to a close, Max found himself back in the alley where his ordeal had begun. His strength was failing rapidly now. The scavenged scraps from trash bins and puddles of melted ice that had sustained him were no longer enough. His once keen senses were dulled by exhaustion and hunger. Even the instinct for self-preservation that had kept him going was beginning to fade. That night, as a fresh layer of snow began to fall, Max felt his strength leaving him. He stumbled, his legs no longer able to support his weight, and collapsed against the cold brick wall of the alley. As he lay there, his breath coming in shallow pants, memories of his former life flashed through his mind. The warmth of the sun on his back as he played in the backyard. The gentle voice of Mrs. Thompson as she brushed his coat. The excited squeals of the children as he chased them through sprinklers on a hot summer day. Deep down, Max's hope faltered. He feared this snowy alley would be his final resting place. The fight that had kept him going for so long was ebbing away, replaced by a profound weariness. His eyes, once bright and full of life, began to close, heavy with exhaustion and defeat. Just as consciousness began to slip away, the faint sound of footsteps in the distance startled him. It was a sound he had heard many times before in the past 2 weeks, the approach of a potential threat or a fleeting moment of kindness. But this time, it was different. There was a purpose to these footsteps, a rhythm that spoke of determination rather than casual passerby. Max blinked weakly, the thin thread of life still within him flickering against the storm. He lifted his head slightly, ears perking up despite his exhaustion. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the soft crunch of snow underfoot. A shadow fell across the entrance to the alley, backlit by the glow of a nearby street lamp. For a moment, hope surged within Max's chest. Had the Thompsons finally come back for him? Had they realized their mistake and searched the city, only to find him here, in the very place they had left him? But as the figure drew closer, that hope faded. This wasn't the familiar silhouette of Mr. Thompson or the excited bouncing of the children. It was someone new, someone unknown. The stranger paused at the mouth of the alley, peering into the gloom. Max watched, his body tense despite his weakness. He had learned the hard way that not all humans were kind, and he braced himself for yet another disappointment or, worse, a threat. But then, a soft voice cut through the silence of the snowy night. "Hello? Is someone there?" The voice was gentle, feminine, tinged with concern. Max's tail gave the faintest of thumps against the snowy ground, an instinctive response to a friendly tone. The figure took a tentative step forward, and Max could make out more details. It was a woman, bundled up against the cold in a thick coat and scarf. She moved slowly, cautiously, as if afraid of startling whatever she had glimpsed in the alley. "Oh my God," the woman breathed as she drew close enough to see Max clearly. The shock and sadness in her voice were palpable. She knelt down, her movements slow and deliberate, and Max found himself looking into a pair of kind, worried eyes. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other, the abandoned dog and the unexpected savior. In that silent exchange, a connection was formed, a lifeline thrown out in the depths of a cold, uncaring night. Max didn't know it yet, but this chance encounter was about to change everything. As the woman reached out a gloved hand towards him, Max summoned the last of his strength. His tail gave another weak thump, and he managed to lift his head just a little higher. It was a gesture of hope, a silent plea for help that he had almost given up on making. The gentle touch of her hand on his matted fur was like a spark of warmth in the frozen wasteland of his existence. For the first time in 2 long, terrible weeks, Max felt something other than fear and despair. He felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Little did Max know, but this moment in the snowy alley was not an ending, but a beginning. The story of his abandonment was drawing to a close, but a new chapter was about to unfold, one of rescue, recovery, and the incredible resilience of the canine spirit. As the kind stranger began to gently lift him from the snow, Max's journey was far from over. It was, in fact, just beginning. Sarah Lawson pulled her scarf tighter against the winter chill as she hurried home through the snowy streets of Portland. The city, usually so vibrant and full of life, seemed muffled and distant under its blanket of white. Streetlights cast a warm glow on the freshly fallen snow, creating an almost magical atmosphere that contrasted sharply with the bone-chilling cold. A nurse at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital, Sarah had just finished a particularly grueling 12-hour shift in the emergency room. Her thoughts were preoccupied with the cases she'd seen that day: a car accident victim, a child with a severe allergic reaction, an elderly man experiencing chest pains. The weight of responsibility she carried was heavy, but it was a burden she had chosen and one that gave her life purpose. As she walked, her breath creating small clouds in the frigid air, Sarah found herself thinking about her empty apartment. At 32, she had thrown herself into her career, leaving little time for a personal life. Her closest companion was her well-worn copy of Grey's Anatomy and the occasional video call with her parents back in Eugene. The loneliness of her lifestyle wasn't something she often allowed herself to dwell on, but on nights like this, with the city so quiet and still, it was hard to ignore. Sarah was so lost in her thoughts that she almost missed it, the smallest glimmer of movement in the corner of her vision. Something made her stop mid-step, her instincts as a medical professional kicking in. In the alley to her right, barely visible in the dim light, she spotted what at first looked like a heap of snow-covered rags. But as she peered closer, her heart began to race. Those weren't rags, it was an animal, and it was moving. Approaching cautiously, Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was seeing. There, huddled against the brick wall of the alley, was a dog. Not just any dog, but a golden retriever, its once beautiful coat matted and dirty, barely distinguishable from the grimy snow around it. The sight broke Sarah's heart instantly. She had grown up with a golden named Buddy, and the memory of his warm, loving presence made the pitiful state of this poor creature all the more painful to witness. As she knelt beside the dog, Sarah could see just how dire its condition was. Its ribs were clearly visible even through the tangled fur, evidence of prolonged starvation. The dog's tail, which should have been a cheerful wagging plume, rested limp on the icy ground. But it was the eyes that truly got to her, large, soulful, and filled with a weariness that seemed to go beyond mere physical exhaustion. This was an animal that had given up hope. "It's okay, boy," she murmured, her voice shaky with emotion. She slowly extended her gloved hand, allowing the dog to catch her scent. "I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." The dog's reaction was minimal, just the slightest lift of its head, its gaze meeting hers. But in that moment, Sarah felt a connection that went beyond words. It was a silent plea for help, one that pierced her like an arrow. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of patients who had all but given up. It was a look that said, "I'm tired. I can't fight anymore. Please, if you can, save me." Without hesitation, Sarah began to act. Her medical training kicked in, assessing the situation rapidly. The dog was severely hypothermic and malnourished. It needed warmth and medical attention immediately. She slipped off her thick wool coat, ignoring the bite of the cold air against her scrubs, and gently wrapped it around the dog's fragile body. As she lifted him and she could now see it was a male, Sarah was shocked at how light he felt. He was scarcely more than skin and bones, a shadow of what a healthy golden retriever should be. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, cradling him close to her chest. "I've got you now. You're safe." The dog didn't struggle as she lifted him. Whether from weakness or a last flicker of trust, he allowed himself to be held. Sarah could feel his faint heartbeat against her chest, a weak but steady rhythm that fueled her determination. She turned, her mind already racing with plans and possibilities, every step through the snow carrying a desperate resolve. She wouldn't let him succumb to the cold. As she walked, Sarah's mind whirled with questions. How had this beautiful animal ended up in such a state? Had he been abandoned? Lost? The thought of someone deliberately leaving this sweet creature to die in the cold filled her with a mixture of sadness and anger. How could anyone be so cruel? The nearest emergency vet clinic was too far to walk in this weather, especially with her precious cargo. Sarah fumbled for her phone with one hand, somehow managing to call for a rideshare while still cradling the dog. As she waited on the corner, she spoke softly to him, a steady stream of reassurances. "You're doing great, Buddy. Help is on the way. Just hang on a little longer." When the car arrived, the driver initially balked at the sight of the filthy, wet dog. But one look at Sarah's determined face, and he relented. "Please," Sarah said, her voice cracking slightly. "He needs help. I'll pay extra for any cleaning." The driver nodded, his expression softening as he took in the pitiful state of the animal in Sarah's arms. The ride to the clinic was tense. Sarah kept her arms wrapped tightly around the dog, trying to share her body heat. She could feel him shivering, his breath coming in shallow pants. "Stay with me," she murmured, her medical training warring with her emotions. She knew the dangers of severe hypothermia, knew that this dog was teetering on the edge. But she also knew the incredible resilience of life, the will to survive that could overcome seemingly impossible odds. As they pulled up to the emergency vet clinic, Sarah's heart was pounding. The bright lights of the entrance seemed to promise hope, a chance at salvation. She thanked the driver profusely, pressing extra cash into his hand before carefully maneuvering out of the car with her precious bundle. The staff at the clinic sprang into action the moment Sarah burst through the doors. A team of veterinary technicians quickly but gently took the dog from her arms, whisking him away to the treatment area. Sarah found herself standing in the waiting room, suddenly bereft, her arms empty but still curved as if holding the dog. A kind-faced receptionist approached her, clipboard in hand. "Can you tell us what happened? Is this your dog?" Sarah shook her head, the events of the last hour catching up with her in a rush. "No, I found him. In an alley. He was just lying there in the snow. I couldn't leave him." The receptionist nodded understandingly, guiding Sarah to a chair. "You did the right thing bringing him in. Can you fill out this form with any information you have? Don't worry about the parts you don't know." As Sarah sat there, mechanically filling out what little information she could provide, the reality of the situation began to sink in. She had just upended her entire evening, possibly more than that, for a stray dog she had found in an alley. A dog that, for all she knew, might not even survive the night. But as that thought crossed her mind, Sarah felt a surge of determination unlike anything she had experienced before. Somewhere within her, seeing this broken soul had ignited a fierce resolve she hadn't realized she was capable of. This dog would survive. He had to. And she would do whatever it took to make sure of it. Hours passed in a blur of worry and waiting. Sarah paced the small waiting area, her mind racing with fear for the dog's well-being. Through the glass door separating her from the treatment area, she caught glimpses of the vet staff working over him. They cleaned his wounds, hooked him up to 4 fluids, and placed warming blankets over his frail body. Each glimpse was both reassuring and terrifying. They were doing everything they could, but his condition was clearly critical. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a tired-looking veterinarian emerged from the treatment area. Sarah stood up immediately, her heart in her throat. "Are you the one who brought in the golden retriever?" the vet asked, and Sarah nodded mutely. The vet's face softened. "Well, first of all, I want to thank you. If you hadn't found him when you did, he wouldn't have survived the night." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief, and she sank back into her chair. The vet sat next to her, his voice gentle but serious. "He's stable for now, but I won't lie to you, his condition is severe. He's suffering from extreme malnutrition, hypothermia, and several infections. It's clear he's been on his own for quite some time. But he'll be okay, right?" Sarah heard herself ask, surprising herself with the intensity of her concern for this dog she had known for mere hours. The vet sighed. "He has a long road ahead of him. It'll take weeks, maybe months, for him to fully recover. But," he paused, a small smile crossing his face, "I think he has the heart to pull through. It's amazing, really. He hasn't given up yet." Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. In that moment, she made a decision that would change the course of her life. This dog, who had fought so hard to survive against all odds, wouldn't have to face any of it alone. She had already made him a silent promise when she found him in the snow, and she intended to keep it. "What happens to him now?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The vet explained the next steps. The dog would need to stay at the clinic for at least a few days for intensive treatment. After that, he would ideally go to a foster home for continued care and rehabilitation. As the vet spoke, Sarah's resolve only grew stronger. "I want to foster him," she said, the words coming out before she had even fully formed the thought. "I'm a nurse, I can provide the care he needs. And I can't explain it, but I feel responsible for him now." The vet looked at her thoughtfully. "It's a big commitment," he warned. "He'll need constant care, medication, special food. And there's no guarantee." "I understand," Sarah interrupted, her voice firm. "But I want to do this. I need to do this." As the vet nodded, accepting her decision, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of purpose that went beyond her work at the hospital. This broken, abandoned dog had awakened something in her, a need to nurture, to heal, to make a difference in a more personal way than she ever had before. As she left the clinic that night, with promises to return first thing in the morning, Sarah felt as though her world had shifted on its axis. The lonely apartment that had seemed so uninviting just hours ago now represented a promise of a new beginning, not just for the dog, but for her as well. She stepped out into the snowy night, the cold air invigorating rather than chilling. The city of Portland, with its snow-covered streets and twinkling lights, seemed full of possibility. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling more alive than she had in years. This was just the beginning of a journey, one that would teach her about resilience, unconditional love, and the incredible capacity for healing that exists in both humans and animals. As she walked home, Sarah found herself smiling, her heart full of hope for the future that lay ahead. The Portland Animal Welfare Shelter, or PAWS as it was affectionately known by locals, was eerily quiet when Sarah arrived the next morning. The fresh snowfall from the night before had blanketed the city in a hushed tranquility, broken only by the occasional bark or meow from within the shelter walls. Sarah had barely slept, her mind racing with thoughts of the golden retriever she had rescued. She had tossed and turned, wondering if he had made it through the night, if he was in pain, if he was scared. As she pushed open the shelter doors, the familiar scent of disinfectant and pet food washed over her. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly against the stillness of the early morning. At the reception desk, a tired-looking volunteer perked up at her entrance. "Good morning," Sarah said, her voice betraying her anxiety. "I'm here to check on a dog that was brought in last night." "A golden retriever?" Recognition dawned on the volunteer's face. "Oh, you must be Sarah. Dr. Martinez left a note about you. He's been waiting for you to arrive." He gestured towards a door marked staff only. "Go on through, they're expecting you." Sarah's heart raced as she made her way down the narrow hallway. The walls were lined with photos of success stories, happy dogs and cats with their new families, before and after pictures of miraculous recoveries. She found herself hoping, praying, that her golden retriever would be one of those success stories. Dr. Martinez met her at the door to the medical wing, his kind eyes crinkling with a smile. "Sarah, good morning. I'm glad you're here. Your boy had a rough night, but he's a fighter. He made it through the night." Sarah felt a wave of relief wash over her. The vet nodded, leading her towards a row of recovery kennels. "He did. It was touch and go for a while, but he's stabilized now. We've got him on 4 fluids and antibiotics, and we're slowly warming him up. He's severely malnourished, so we'll have to be careful about reintroducing food." They stopped in front of a kennel at the end of the row. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw the golden retriever lying on a bed of soft blankets. He looked so small and fragile, hooked up to various machines and tubes. But as they approached, his tail gave a weak thump against the blanket. "Hey there, buddy," Sarah said softly, kneeling down to be at eye level with him. "Remember me?" The dog's eyes, though still clouded with pain and exhaustion, seemed to brighten at the sound of her voice. He lifted his head slightly, his tail giving another feeble wag. Dr. Martinez watched the interaction with interest. "He seems to remember you. That's a good sign. Dogs are incredibly resilient, but having someone they trust can make a world of difference in their recovery." Sarah reached out, gently stroking the dog's head. His fur was clean now, though still matted in places. "Does he have a name?" she asked. The vet shook his head. "No collar, no microchip. He's a John Doe for now. Unless..." He looked at Sarah questioningly. Sarah thought for a moment, her hand still gently caressing the dog's soft ears. "Max," she said finally. "He looks like a Max to me." "Max it is, then," Dr. Martinez agreed with a smile. "Now, Sarah, I know you expressed interest in fostering Max once he's ready to leave the shelter. Are you still interested in that?" Sarah nodded without hesitation. "Absolutely. Whatever he needs, I'm ready." The vet's smile widened. "I'm glad to hear that. It'll be a while before he's ready to leave, at least a week, maybe 2. We need to get his strength up, treat his infections, and make sure he's stable. But in the meantime, your visits will be crucial to his recovery." Over the next few days, Sarah fell into a new routine. She'd wake up early, stop by the shelter before her shift at the hospital to check on Max and spend some time with him. Then, after her shift ended, she'd return to the shelter, often staying until closing time. Each day, she saw small improvements in Max's condition. His eyes grew brighter, more alert. His tail wagged with more enthusiasm when he saw her. Slowly but surely, he began to put on weight, his ribs becoming less prominent under his golden fur. Sarah found herself talking to Max constantly during her visits, telling him about her day, her life, her hopes and fears. "You know, Max," she said one evening, sitting cross-legged in front of his kennel, "I've lived in Portland for 5 years now, but I've never really felt at home. It's a great city, don't get me wrong. The food scene is amazing. There's this little food cart, Nong's Khao Man Gari, that makes the most incredible Thai chicken and rice. And the parks. Forest Park is like this huge, green oasis right in the middle of the city. I go hiking there sometimes on my days off." Max listened attentively, his head tilted slightly to one side. Sarah laughed. "Look at me, rambling on. But you know what? I think you're the first one I've really talked to like this in a long time." As the days passed, Sarah found herself opening up more and more to Maximum. She told him about her childhood in Eugene, about her decision to become a nurse, about the loneliness she often felt in her chosen career. "It's rewarding work," she explained to Max one day as she gently brushed his coat, careful to avoid the areas where his fur was attached. "But it can be emotionally draining. Sometimes I feel like I give so much of myself to my patients that there's nothing left for me at the end of the day." Max responded by gently licking her hand, and Sarah felt her heart swell with affection. "You're a good listener, you know that." The shelter staff noticed the bond forming between Sarah and Maximum. They'd smile knowingly when she arrived, sometimes having a cup of coffee ready for her. Sarah found herself chatting with them, learning more about animal care and the challenges of running a shelter. One afternoon, about a week into Max's stay at the shelter, Dr. Martinez pulled Sarah aside. "I've got good news," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Max's latest blood work came back, and his levels are much improved. If he continues progressing like this, we might be able to release him into your care by the end of next week." Sarah felt a mix of excitement and nervousness at the news. "That's wonderful," she said. "But, am I ready? Is he ready?" Dr. Martinez patted her shoulder reassuringly. "Sarah, I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've rarely seen a bond form as quickly and strongly as the one between you and Maximum. You're more than ready. And as for Max, I think being with you is exactly what he needs to complete his recovery." Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into preparations for bringing Max home. She read everything she could find about caring for rescue dogs, about helping them overcome trauma and anxiety. She visited pet stores, buying a comfortable bed, toys, a leash, and high-quality dog food recommended by Dr. Martinez. Her small apartment, which had always felt a bit empty, began to transform. A cozy corner of the living room became Max's special space, with his bed and toys arranged just so. Sarah found herself looking forward to the day when Max would occupy that space, when his presence would fill the rooms with life and warmth. As the day of Max's release approached, Sarah's excitement was tinged with a hint of worry. What if Max didn't adjust well to her apartment? What if his health took a turn for the worse? What if she wasn't up to the task of caring for him? But every time she visited Max at the shelter, those doubts melted away. The way his whole body seemed to light up when he saw her, the trust in his eyes as she sat with him, talking softly and stroking his fur, it all reassured her that they were meant to be together. On the morning of Max's release, Sarah arrived at the shelter early, her heart pounding with anticipation. The staff had gathered to say goodbye to Max, who had become something of a celebrity during his stay. There were more than a few teary eyes as Dr. Martinez went over Max's care instructions one last time. "Remember," he said, handing Sarah a folder full of information, "he'll need to take it easy for a while. Short walks at first, gradually increasing as he gains strength. Keep up with his medication schedule, and don't hesitate to call if you have any concerns." Sarah nodded, taking in every word. Then, with a deep breath, she turned to Max's kennel. "Ready to go home, buddy?" Max stood up, a bit shaky but with a determined look in his eyes. As Sarah clipped on his new leash, she felt a surge of emotion. This was it. This was the beginning of their new life together. As they walked out of the shelter, Max leaning against Sarah's leg for support, the staff broke into applause. "Good luck, Max. We'll miss you. Take good care of him, Sarah." Outside, the Portland morning greeted them with a soft drizzle, typical of the Pacific Northwest. The city seemed to sparkle, raindrops clinging to trees and buildings like tiny jewels. Sarah looked down at Max, who was sniffing the air with interest, his tail wagging gently. "Welcome to your new life, Max," she said softly. "We're in this together now." As they made their way down the street towards Sarah's apartment, she felt a profound sense of rightness. The city that had once felt so lonely and impersonal now seemed full of possibility. With Max by her side, Sarah knew that she was embarking on a new adventure, one filled with challenges, yes, but also with love, companionship, and the joy of giving a deserving dog a second chance at happiness. The road ahead would not be easy. Max still had a long way to go in his recovery, both physically and emotionally. But as they walked home together, step by careful step, Sarah knew that they would face whatever came their way as a team. This was more than just a new beginning for Max, it was a new beginning for both of them, a chance to heal old wounds and create a bond that would change both their lives forever. The first few days in Sarah's apartment were a whirlwind of adjustment for both Max and Sarah. As they stepped into the cozy one-bedroom space in Portland's charming Selwood neighborhood, Max's nose twitched with curiosity, taking in the unfamiliar scents. Sarah watched him carefully, her heart swelling with a mixture of joy and apprehension. "Welcome home, Max," she said softly, unclipping his leash. Max took a tentative step forward, his paws sinking into the plush area rug. He looked back at Sarah, as if seeking reassurance. "It's okay, buddy. This is your home now." Max's journey of healing and trust-building began in earnest that very first night. As darkness fell over Portland, the soft patter of rain against the windows created a soothing ambience. Sarah had set up a cozy bed for Max in the living room, complete with soft blankets and a few toys. But as she prepared to turn in for the night, she noticed Max hadn't moved from his spot by the front door. "Max," she called gently. The golden retriever's ears perked up, but he remained rooted to the spot, his eyes wide with uncertainty. Sarah's heart ached as she realized he was waiting to be let out, perhaps expecting to be abandoned again. Kneeling beside him, Sarah spoke in soothing tones. "It's okay, Maximum. You're not going anywhere. This is your home now." She gently stroked his fur, feeling the tension in his body. "Come on, let me show you your bed." It took some coaxing, but eventually, Max followed Sarah to his new bed. He sniffed it cautiously before gingerly stepping onto the soft surface. Sarah sat on the floor beside him, continuing to talk softly and stroke his fur until his eyes began to droop. That night, Sarah left her bedroom door open, listening for any signs of distress from Maximum. She woke several times, padding quietly to the living room to check on him. Each time, she found him curled up tightly in his bed, his body tense even in sleep. The days that followed fell into a gentle routine. Sarah would wake early, taking Max for a short walk around the block before heading to work. She had taken a week off from the hospital to help Max settle in, but now it was time to return to her shifts. "I'll be back soon, buddy," she promised each morning, her heart heavy as she saw the anxiety in Max's eyes. "You be a good boy, okay?" While Sarah was at work, a dog walker named Jake would come by to check on Max, take him for a short walk, and give him his medication. Jake, a lanky college student with a mop of curly hair and an easy smile, had been recommended by the shelter. His laid-back demeanor seemed to put Max at ease, which relieved Sarah immensely. Each evening when Sarah returned home, she was greeted by Max's cautious wagging tail. Day by day, his welcome became a little more enthusiastic, his eyes a little brighter. Sarah would spend her evenings with Max, talking to him about her day as she prepared dinner, sitting on the floor beside him as they shared the quiet moments before bedtime. Physical healing came more quickly than emotional healing. Under Sarah's careful attention and the guidance of Dr. Martinez, Max's body began to recover. His ribs became less prominent as he gained weight, and his coat regained its golden luster. The various scrapes and sores he had accumulated during his time on the streets healed, leaving behind only a few small scars as reminders of his ordeal. But the emotional scars ran deeper. Max's progress in trusting Sarah and adjusting to his new life came in small, sometimes almost imperceptible steps. The first time he wagged his tail without hesitation when Sarah came home was a moment of quiet triumph. The day he finally felt comfortable enough to fall asleep sprawled out on his bed instead of curled up in a tight, defensive ball was cause for celebration. There were setbacks, of course. Loud noises would send Max into a panic, cowering under the dining room table or pressing himself into corners. The sound of car doors slamming outside would make him tremble, likely bringing back memories of his abandonment. Sarah learned to be patient, to move slowly and speak softly, to create an environment of calm and safety for Maximum. One rainy Saturday about 3 weeks after Max had come home, Sarah decided it was time to try a longer outing. "What do you say we go to the park, Max?" she asked, holding up his leash. Max's ears perked up at the word park, a spark of interest in his eyes. They made their way to Selwood Riverfront Park, a beautiful green space along the Willamette River. The rain had let up, leaving behind that fresh, clean scent that often follows a storm. As they walked along the path, Max seemed to come alive. His nose worked overtime, taking in all the new smells. His tail, usually kept low, began to wag with more enthusiasm. Sarah watched him with a smile, her heart full. "You like it here, don't you, buddy?" she said, reaching down to ruffle his ears. Max looked up at her, and for a moment, Sarah saw a glimpse of the happy, carefree dog he must have been before his ordeal. As they rounded a bend in the path, they came across a group of people playing frisbee in an open field. Max stopped, his body tensing. Sarah prepared herself for a panic reaction, ready to turn around and head home if needed. But to her surprise, Max's tail began to wag slowly. One of the frisbee players, a young woman with braided hair, noticed them. "Cute dog," she called out. "Want to join us?" Sarah hesitated, looking down at Maximum. His eyes were fixed on the frisbee, a spark of something like memory in his gaze. "What do you think, Max?" she asked softly. "Want to give it a try?" Max's response was to take a step forward, his tail wagging with more confidence. Sarah's heart soared. "Sure," she called back to the group. "We'd love to join you." What followed was a breakthrough moment for Maximum. At first, he was hesitant, staying close to Sarah's side. But as the frisbee flew through the air, something seemed to awaken in him. When one of the players gently tossed the frisbee in their direction, Max's instincts took over. He bounded after it, snatching it out of the air with a grace that belied his recent condition. The group cheered, and Max trotted back to Sarah, the frisbee held proudly in his mouth. His eyes were bright, his tail wagging furiously. For the first time since she had found him in that snowy alley, Sarah saw pure, unbridled joy in Max's demeanor. They stayed at the park for over an hour, Max's confidence growing with each successful catch. By the time they headed home, Max was panting happily, his tongue lolling out of his mouth in a doggy grin. Sarah couldn't stop smiling, her heart full of hope for Max's continued recovery. That night, as they settled in for the evening, Sarah noticed a change in Maximum. Instead of curling up in his bed as usual, he padded over to where she sat on the couch, reading a book. With a soft whine, he placed his head on her lap, looking up at her with trusting eyes. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she gently stroked his head. "Good boy, Max," she whispered. "You're such a good boy." For the first time since coming to live with Sarah, Max fell asleep with his head on her lap, his body relaxed and trusting. It was a small moment, but it felt monumental. The walls Max had built around himself were starting to come down, brick by brick. As the weeks turned into months, Max's transformation continued. His physical recovery was remarkable, his coat gleamed, his eyes sparkled with health, and he moved with the easy grace of a dog in his prime. But it was the emotional changes that truly amazed Sarah. The fearful, distrustful dog she had found in that alley was slowly but surely being replaced by a loving, confident companion. Max's tail now wagged freely when Sarah came home from work. He greeted Jake the dog walker with enthusiasm, clearly looking forward to their daily walks. And at the dog park, Max had become a favorite among the regular visitors, his playful nature and gentle demeanor winning him many friends, both canine and human. There were still moments of anxiety. still times when a loud noise or sudden movement would cause Max to flinch. But those moments became fewer and farther between. And when they did occur, Max would now seek comfort from Sarah instead of trying to hide or escape. One evening, as Sarah sat on her small balcony watching the sunset paint the Portland skyline in hues of pink and gold, Max came to sit beside her. He leaned against her leg, his warm presence a comfort in the cool evening air. Sarah looked down at him, marveling at how far they had come together. "You know, Max," she said softly, scratching behind his ears in the way he loved, "when I found you that night, I thought I was saving you. But the truth is, you've saved me too." Max looked up at her, his brown eyes full of understanding and love. In that moment, Sarah knew that the wounds of the past, both Max's and her own, were truly beginning to heal. The trust they had built, the bond they shared, was stronger than any pain or fear. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Sarah and Max sat together, two souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed. The journey of healing and trust-building was ongoing, but with each passing day, their connection grew stronger, their love deeper. In rescuing Max, Sarah had found not just a pet, but a true companion, a source of joy and purpose that filled her life in ways she had never expected. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Sarah knew that she and Max would face them together, their bond unbreakable, their trust in each other absolute. As the first stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky, Sarah made a silent promise to Max and to herself. This was only the beginning of their story, and the best was yet to come. As summer bloomed in Portland, bringing with it long, sun-drenched days and balmy evenings, Sarah and Max settled into a comfortable rhythm together. Their small apartment in Selwood had transformed from Sarah's quiet retreat into a warm, lively home filled with the sounds of jingling tags, playful barks, and shared laughter. Every morning began with Max's gentle nudge, his cold nose pressed against Sarah's hand as if to say, "Time to start the day." Sarah found herself looking forward to these wake-up calls, a stark contrast to the jarring alarm that had once started her days. They'd share a quick breakfast, a bowl of cereal for Sarah, a scoop of premium dog food for Max, before heading out for their morning walk. Their route usually took them down to the Willamette River, where the early morning mist would still be clinging to the water's surface. Max, now strong and healthy, would bound ahead, his golden coat gleaming in the soft morning light. Sarah would watch him with a smile, marveling at how far he'd come from that frightened, emaciated dog she'd found in the alley. "Max, heel," she'd call out, and he'd immediately trot back to her side, looking up at her with adoring eyes. His obedience training had come along amazingly well, a testament to his intelligence and eagerness to please. After their walk, Sarah would head off to her shifts at the hospital, leaving Max in the capable hands of Jake, the dog walker. But even on her busiest days, thoughts of Max would bring a smile to her face. She'd find herself sharing stories about him with her co-workers and patients, pulling out her phone to show pictures of Max at the dog park or curled up on the couch. "You've got it bad," her friend and fellow nurse, Lisa, teased her one day over coffee in the hospital cafeteria. "I've never seen you like this over a guy, and here you are, totally smitten with a dog." Sarah laughed, not even trying to deny it. "He's not just any dog, though. Max is, he's special. He's been through so much, and yet he still has so much love to give. He's teaching me something new every day." Lisa's eyes softened. "I can see that. You seem happier, you know? More grounded. It's good to see." Sarah nodded, realizing the truth in her friend's words. Having Max in her life had changed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Her world, which had once revolved almost entirely around her work, had expanded. She found herself looking forward to weekends and days off in a way she never had before, excited for the adventures she and Max could share. Those adventures often took them to new corners of Portland. They explored the winding trails of Forest Park, Max's nose working overtime as he investigated every new scent. They visited the bustling Saturday market, where Max charmed vendors and shoppers alike with his gentle demeanor and soulful eyes. On warm evenings, they joined the crowd at Laurelhurst Park for outdoor movie screenings. Max contentedly sprawled at Sarah's feet as they watched classic films under the stars. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. Max's past traumas would sometimes resurface in unexpected ways. One 4th of July, the sound of fireworks sent him into a panic, and Sarah spent hours sitting with him in the bathroom, the fan running to muffle the noise, stroking his fur and murmuring reassurances. There was also the day a car backfired while they were out on a walk, causing Max to bolt in terror. Sarah's heart had dropped as she watched him run, terrified that she might lose him. But even in his panic, the bond between them held true. Max had run only a short distance before stopping, turning back to look at Sarah with wide, frightened eyes. She had approached him slowly, speaking in a calm, soothing voice, and he had come back to her, pressing against her legs as if seeking protection. These moments, though challenging, only served to deepen the connection between them. Each obstacle overcome, each fear conquered, was a shared victory that strengthened their bond. As fall approached, bringing with it crisp air and colorful foliage, Sarah decided it was time for a new adventure. She planned a weekend camping trip to Oxbow Regional Park, just east of Portland. It would be Max's first time out of the city, and Sarah was excited to see how he would react to the great outdoors. The drive out to the park was an adventure in itself. Max sat in the backseat, his head hanging out the window, ears flapping in the wind as they left the city behind and entered the lush green landscape of the Columbia River Gorge. Sarah couldn't help but laugh at his obvious joy, his tongue lolling out in a happy doggy grin. Setting up camp was a bit of a challenge, with an excited Max wanting to explore every inch of their surroundings, but Sarah wouldn't have had it any other way. As the tent finally took shape and their gear was unpacked, Sarah stood back, hands on her hips, surveying their home for the next 2 days. "Well, Max," she said, looking down at her furry companion, "what do you think? Not bad for our first camping trip, huh?" Max's response was to give an enthusiastic bark before bounding off towards a nearby pile of leaves, sending them scattering in a burst of red and gold. That evening, as they sat by the campfire, the flames casting a warm glow on their faces, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in the months since she'd found Maximum. She had always been independent, focused on her career to the exclusion of almost everything else. But Max had opened her heart in ways she hadn't expected, teaching her the joy of caring for another being, of being needed and loved unconditionally. As if sensing her thoughts, Max moved closer, resting his head on her lap. Sarah scratched behind his ears, smiling as he let out a contented sigh. "You know, Max," she said softly, "I used to think I was happy with my life the way it was. But now I can't imagine my life without you in it." The weekend flew by in a blur of hiking trails, splashing in the sandy river, and quiet evenings by the campfire. Max took to camping like he was born to it, his natural curiosity and energy making every moment an adventure. By the time they packed up to head home, Sarah felt refreshed and invigorated in a way she hadn't in years. As they drove back into Portland, the skyline coming into view as they crested a hill, Sarah felt a sense of contentment wash over her. This city, which had once felt so impersonal, now felt like home in a way it never had before. And it was all because of the golden retriever dozing in her backseat. Life settled back into its routine, but it was a routine tinged with the warmth of companionship and shared experiences. Sarah's apartment, once spartanly decorated, began to fill with evidence of their life together. Photos of their camping trip joined the few family pictures on the walls. A basket overflowing with dog toys took up residence in the corner of the living room. Max's leash hung by the door, always ready for their next adventure. Even Sarah's work life had been touched by Max's influence. She found herself more patient with difficult patients, more empathetic to their fears and concerns. Her experiences with Max had taught her the power of gentle persistence, of quietly being there for someone as they worked through their pain and fear. One day, as she was leaving work, Sarah ran into Dr. Martinez in the hospital parking lot. The veterinarian's face lit up when he saw her. "Sarah, it's great to see you," he said warmly. "How's our boy Max doing?" Sarah couldn't help the smile that spread across her face. "He's doing amazingly well. You wouldn't recognize him as the same dog we brought in that night." Dr. Martinez nodded, his eyes twinkling. "I'm not surprised. You two had a special connection right from the start. But you know," he added, his tone becoming more serious, "it's not just Max who's transformed. I see a change in you too, Sarah. You seem happier, more at peace." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat, touched by the doctor's observation. "I am," she said simply. "Max has changed my life in ways I never expected. He's shown me what it means to be truly needed, to be loved unconditionally. I thought I was rescuing him, but in so many ways, he rescued me too." As she drove home that evening, Sarah's mind was full of the journey she and Max had taken together. From that cold, snowy night in the alley to warm evenings cuddled on the couch, from a frightened, abandoned dog to a happy, confident companion, from a lonely, work-focused woman to someone who had learned to open her heart to love and joy. Pulling into her parking spot, Sarah saw Max's face appear in the window, his tail wagging furiously as he spotted her car. She waved at him, feeling the familiar surge of happiness at seeing him. As she walked up to her apartment, keys in hand, Sarah knew that whatever challenges life might bring, she and Max would face them together. They had found in each other not just companionship, but a true partnership, a shared life full of love, trust, and endless possibilities. Opening the door, Sarah was greeted by Max's exuberant welcome, his whole body wiggling with joy. She knelt down, wrapping her arms around him in a warm hug. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "I'm home." And in that moment, with Max's solid warmth against her and his heartbeat echoing her own, Sarah knew that she truly was home. This was where she belonged. This was the life she was meant to live. And it had all started with one act of kindness on a cold winter's night. As they settled in for the evening, Sarah and Max curled up on the couch together, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm shadows around the room. Outside, the city of Portland hummed with life, but in here, in this cozy apartment, was a world of their own making. A world built on second chances, on healing and growth, on the unbreakable bond between a woman and the dog who had stolen her heart. Sarah picked up the book she'd been reading, but found her attention drawn instead to Max, peacefully dozing with his head on her lap. She smiled, running her fingers through his soft fur. "Sweet dreams, Max," she whispered. "Here's to our new life together." And as the evening deepened into night, Sarah and Max remained there, two souls perfectly content in each other's company, their shared journey only just beginning. As the seasons turned and another year began in Portland, Sarah found herself reflecting on the incredible journey she and Max had taken together. The harsh winter that had brought them together seemed like a lifetime ago, yet the memory of finding Max in that snowy alley remained vivid in her mind. One crisp January morning, as they took their usual walk along the Willamette River, Sarah paused to watch Max bounding through a pile of fallen leaves. His golden coat shone in the weak winter sunlight, his tail wagging with unbridled joy. It was hard to reconcile this happy, healthy dog with the frightened, emaciated creature she had rescued a year ago. "Max, come here, boy," Sarah called, and Max trotted over obediently, looking up at her with adoring eyes. As she knelt to ruffle his ears, Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. "You've come so far, buddy," she murmured. "We both have." Indeed, the transformation wasn't limited to Maximum. Sarah, too, had changed in ways she was only now beginning to fully appreciate. The once lonely nurse who had often buried herself in work now had a partner who gave her days renewed meaning. Max's presence had forced her to slow down, to appreciate life's simple joys, and to open her heart to the unexpected. Their bond had become unshakable, forged through hardship and healing. Max, now a healthy, lively golden retriever, had taken to greeting Sarah every evening with an exuberant bark and a wagging tail that left no doubt about the depths of his love for her. In return, Sarah gave him a life of warmth and security, the life he had always deserved but had once been denied. As they continued their walk, Sarah's mind wandered to the ways their story had touched others. It had started small, with Sarah sharing updates about Max's progress on her social media accounts. Friends and family had been captivated by the tale of the rescued dog and his journey to health and happiness. But it didn't stop there. Sarah's colleagues at the hospital had become invested in Max's story, often asking for updates and delighting in the photos Sarah would share. Patients, too, found comfort in hearing about Max during their often difficult stays in the hospital. Sarah discovered that talking about Max's resilience and recovery often gave hope to those facing their own battles. One day, a local newspaper reporter overheard Sarah talking about Max in a coffee shop and asked if she could write a feature on their story. Sarah had hesitated at first, uncomfortable with the idea of being in the spotlight. But then she thought about all the other abandoned animals out there, all the potential loving homes waiting to be found. The article, when it was published, struck a chord with the community. Sarah's phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and strangers alike, all touched by Max's journey. The local animal shelter reported a surge in adoptions in the weeks following the article's publication, with several people specifically mentioning Max's story as their inspiration. This unexpected ripple effect amazed Sarah. She and Max had been invited to speak at schools about responsible pet ownership and the importance of animal rescue. They'd participated in fundraising events for the shelter, Max charming everyone he met with his gentle nature and soulful eyes. Their story had even inspired a local artist to create a series of paintings featuring rescue animals, with Max as the star of the collection. As they rounded the bend in the river path, heading back towards home, Sarah spotted a familiar face. It was Jake, Max's former dog walker, out for a jog. He waved as he approached, slowing to a stop beside them. "Sarah, Max. Great to see you guys," Jake said, slightly out of breath. He knelt down to give Max a pat, grinning as the dog leaned into his touch. "Man, I still can't get over how great he looks. Remember when we first started our walks? He could barely make it around the block." Sarah nodded, smiling at the memory. "He's come so far. We both have." She hesitated for a moment before adding, "You know, Jake, I never properly thanked you for everything you did for us in those early days. Your patience with Max, your willingness to work with his fears and limitations, it made such a difference." Jake stood up, his expression serious. "No thanks necessary, Sarah. Being part of Max's recovery was a privilege. Actually," he rubbed the back of his neck, looking a bit sheepish, "I should be thanking you. Watching you with Max, seeing the difference you made in his life, well, it inspired me to change my career path." Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Really?" Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, I'm in vet tech school now. I want to work with rescue animals, help more dogs like Max get their second chance." As they said their goodbyes and continued on their separate ways, Sarah felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the brisk walk. The idea that their story had inspired such a significant life change in Jake was both humbling and exhilarating. Arriving back at their apartment, Sarah unclipped Max's leash and watched as he trotted over to his water bowl. As he lapped up the water, she found herself looking around their home with fresh eyes. The apartment that had once felt so empty was now filled with life. Max's toys were scattered across the floor, his bed took up a cozy corner of the living room, and photos of their adventures together adorned the walls. But it was more than just the physical changes. The space was filled with an intangible warmth, a sense of belonging that Sarah had never experienced before. Later that evening, as they settled on the couch for their nightly routine of reading, for Sarah, and gentle snoring, for Max, Sarah found her thoughts drifting once again to the journey they had taken together. Max, now a healthy, lively golden retriever, had taken to greeting Sarah every evening with an exuberant bark and a wagging tail that left no doubt about the depths of his love for her. In return, Sarah gave him a life of warmth and security, the life he had always deserved but had once been denied. Their bond had become unbreakable, forged through hardship and healing. Together, they had become a reminder to everyone around them about the power of second chances. Max's story, once defined by abandonment and loss, now stood as a beacon of hope, showing that even in the darkest of moments, there could always be light. Sarah realized that in saving Max, he had saved her too. He had taught her about resilience, about the capacity for joy even after great suffering. He had shown her that it was never too late for a new beginning, never too late to open your heart and let love in. As she absently stroked Max's fur, Sarah thought about all the lives they had touched, the shelter staff who had cheered Max's recovery, the neighbors who always stopped to chat during their walks, the children at the schools they had visited who had listened wide-eyed to Max's story. Each interaction, each shared moment, was a testament to the ripple effect of kindness, the far-reaching impact of one simple act of compassion. Sarah's phone buzzed with a notification, pulling her from her reverie. It was a message from Dr. Martinez, the veterinarian who had treated Max in those first critical days. Attached was a photo of a skinny, scared-looking Labrador, newly rescued and in need of a foster home. Thought of you and Max, the message read. This little guy could use some of that magic you two have. No pressure, but if you're interested in fostering. Sarah looked at the photo, then down at Max, peacefully sleeping with his head on her lap. She thought about the scared, distrustful dog Max had once been, and the loving, confident companion he had become. She thought about the joy and purpose he had brought into her life, the ways he had changed her for the better. With a smile, Sarah began to type her reply. We'd be honored to help. Max and I believe in second chances. As she hit send, Sarah felt a sense of excitement bubbling up inside her. This was a new adventure, a new opportunity to make a difference. And she knew, without a doubt, that she and Max were ready for it. The journey they had begun on that cold winter night was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it felt like it was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead, new obstacles to overcome. But Sarah knew that with Max by her side, there was nothing they couldn't face together. As the evening deepened into night, Sarah and Max remained there on the couch, two souls perfectly content in each other's company. Outside, the city of Portland hummed with life, a vast tapestry of stories unfolding in every street and every home. And here, in this cozy apartment, was just one of those stories, a tale of rescue and redemption, of healing and hope, of the extraordinary power of love to transform lives. Sarah looked down at Max, gently running her fingers through his soft fur. Thank you, she whispered, though she knew the words could never fully express the depth of her gratitude. Max, as if understanding, lifted his head and gave her hand a gentle lick. In that quiet moment, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace wash over her. Whatever the future held, she and Max would face it together. Their story was a testament to the power of second chances, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, hope and love can find a way. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, Max a warm, comforting presence at her side, she knew that their journey was far from over. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning. And she couldn't wait to see where it would take them next. The end of their story was really just the beginning, a beginning filled with promise, with love, and with the unshakable bond between a woman and the dog who had not only stolen her heart but had helped her find herself in the process. Together, Sarah and Max had discovered the true power of second chances, and in doing so, had created a life more beautiful and fulfilling than either could have ever imagined.